Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session From Risks to Return, WEFE Nexus Solutions for Climate Resilience. WEFE stands for Water, Energy, Food Security, and Ecosystems Security. This session is co-convened by the Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, by UNESE, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and by the GIZ through the Nexus Regional Dialogues Program, which is co-funded by the BMZ and EU. My name is Irene. I'm the head of the so-called Global Nexus Secretariat, which is part of the aforementioned Nexus Regional Dialogues Program. And together with Mariana, I will moderate this session. Mariana, do you want to quickly say hello?
Hello, welcome everybody. Happy to be joining you today and moderating this session, co-moderating this session with Irene. We both work for the Nexus Regional Dialogues Program.
Yes, so as I mentioned, we're three co-conveners. The IDB, UNESE, and GIZ are part of a bigger community of organizations that are promoting the WEFE Nexus approach, so cross-sectoral coordination for natural resource management. Our intention for this session was to introduce you to some of the experts and the thought leaders that we've come across in our work and that have enriched our work with their analysis, their knowledge products, and their different missions. We've invited them to the panel so that they can share their insights with you today. Nexus is a very vast topic, a sphere, and so you could easily spend several sessions discussing different aspects of Nexus. But we've narrowed down the focus to the topic of finance. We want to explore in the session, amongst others, whether the WEFE Nexus approach can actually facilitate the mobilization of financing for projects related to natural resource management. So some of the discussion points that we will be mentioning are not necessarily unique to WEFE Nexus, to the WEFE Nexus approach. However, we will make sure that we will also put forward arguments that specifically target the merits of integrated projects for the mobilization of financing. I would now like to quickly present the agenda. So we have a slide on the agenda, Eva. So we will kick off the meeting with a keynote speech by Lucia de Strasser, the Environmental Affairs Officer at UNESE. Lucia works at the Secretariat of the Water Convention in Geneva, and she leads the working group on cross-sectoral cooperation and transboundary basin management. We will then move on to a Bolivian success story of how cross-sectoral coordination has successfully increased water, food, and ecosystem security. And this presentation will be given by Cristina Mesereyes, Senior Water and Sanitation Specialist at IDB. We will then move on to the panel discussion, which is composed of experts from the public and financing sector, as well as experts from research organizations that have, amongst others, specialized on the WEFE Nexus. And then finally, we will wrap up the session with some concluding remarks given by Raul Munoz Castillo, who's a senior water and sanitation specialist at IDB. Before I hand over to Lucia, I just really quickly want to encourage you all, our audience, to join in and to post your comments and your questions in the chat window that's on the Pathables page. My colleagues Tina and Eva will be monitoring this chat window and can transfer your messages to the moderators. There's one extra point, last point before handing over to the keynote speech. We would like to know who you are, so who's the audience that we're addressing today. And we've therefore prepared a poll, which only has 3 questions, so this should not take too much of your time, whereby we want to like to know which sectors you represent and which thematic focuses you're working on. And with this, I would like to hand over to Lucia.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Do you hear me well? Yes. Thank you, Irene and Mariana for the introduction. Thank you all colleagues and participants. It's a pleasure and a real honor to open this session. I have the hard task to introduce a Nexus session and the Nexus topic. So let's try this. So we have heard several times already in these first couple of days of the World Water Week that the time is now to take action on water. And we have also heard again and again that water issues are really not just about water. They're about the environment, they're about agriculture, energy, about production and consumption of goods. They're about climate change, disasters, and they're about financing. Now, the water, food, energy nexus concept is probably very familiar already to a lot of you. And just in a few words, what the concept tells us is that when there are higher demands of natural resources, there are also more trade-offs across the areas of energy, food, water, and other sectors, industry, tourism, and so on. And there are also more trade-offs with the environment and the environmental needs. So when resources become scarce or degraded, then these trade-offs can cause friction between users and possibly loss of ecosystems and their vital services. However, the other side of the coin is that we know that there are synergies, and we know that we are not sufficiently exploiting these synergies as of now. So all in all, acting together should lead to the development of so-called nexus solutions that generate multiple benefits. Now, when we apply a nexus approach to natural resource management, what we're doing, we're basically looking at resource optimization across uses. We're looking at resource efficiency within each sector. We're looking at recycling and reuse of resources. So it's a lot about modeling these resources in a way, and it's a lot about technological innovation also. And these themes play such a big role in Nexus dialogues commonly. But we should never forget that the decisions related to water, energy, and food impact are deeply political, and without political vision, political commitment, it's really difficult to tackle these issues together. So from the perspective of the Water Convention that supports transboundary cooperation around the world, the nexus is important because trade-offs and impacts across sectors, and notably between energy and agriculture, are very common in transboundary contexts. And taking a nexus approach to transboundary cooperation means improving basin level policy, basin level planning with respect to these trade-offs. So addressing existing trade-offs and anticipating possible trade-offs in new plans. And then it also means discussing synergies, joint projects, joint planning, trade, and so on. So it essentially means more coordination and more cooperation across sectors and across countries. Now, while the need for this approach to water resource management is evident, we often hear that we are missing the evidence of the benefits of it. Why should we explore complex cooperative solutions across sectors and not just, for instance, work harder to make each sector more efficient and smarter? Well, one answer is that this approach doesn't allow us to find synergetic solutions, creative solutions. So solutions that leverage on possible complementarities and common interests. And we need to discuss this type of action specifically. We recently carried out a global survey to gather experience of stakeholders implementing nexus solutions to tackle water and environment issues in shared basins. And one fact clearly emerged. The economic case for nexus investments is not strong enough, or rather is not clear enough. Meaning that in principle, the nexus approach should help catalyzing co-financing for water and environment services from other sectors and from private sectors. However, there is a lack of evidence that this is actually happening. And yet we see that there are initiatives where integrated solutions are being found and implemented, thinking explicitly about the multiple benefits that they can generate. Sometimes these initiatives are promoted by private actors, and we are missing the link between these initiatives and policies and plans, which means that we are missing an opportunity to use these resources to finance the much needed investments in water and environment. So insufficient financial resources may be a big obstacle, but there are ways to channel resources more efficiently through basin level action plans, for example, coordinated strategies, investment plans, or even specific projects. What we see is that strategies agreed by multiple stakeholders and supported by financial institutions sometimes are very important vehicles for the implementation of nexus investments. In fact, and not surprisingly, from this survey, it also emerged that since these policy silos and also investment silos are so strong, stronger cooperation is quoted as the biggest factors of success when implementing nexus solutions. So then now we have two questions. One is about the economic case for nexus solutions. How do we improve the risk returns characteristics of a nexus project? How do we translate it into financing? Where can the money come from? How can we combine multiple financing sources and so on? The second question is about policies and the institutional setup that is needed to support this type of investments. What is the governance framework that we need and what decision-making support tools do we need to see these solutions implemented on the ground and less risk attached to them also. The session will revolve around these two questions, and we will hear from our speakers the lessons learned from on-the-ground projects from their experience, which will be very interesting. I would like to stress the importance of this discussion from the perspective of regional cooperation, because it's so important for me and for us. If the Nexus approach should help improving water management at all levels, from local to global, this is also true for shared waters, which count for about 60% of water resources in the world. And in this context, institutional and legal cooperation frameworks may be lacking or insufficient to support this type of cross-sectoral action. So in this context, can Nexus solutions at different levels, local to regional, help improving the management of shared resources? This will be one of the themes of discussion at the upcoming meeting of the parties, the 9th meeting of the parties, which will happen between 29th of September and 1st of October 2021. There will also be a side event prior to the meeting of the parties on 26th of September on the Nexus, and I invite all of you to take part of these events, which will be fortunately and unfortunately virtual, but they will be open for everyone. Other themes and focus will be the development of agreements, climate adaptation, financing cooperation, but I will put more information in the chat. Let me conclude by saying that this discussion about Nexus solutions and investments is and should not be a conceptual exercise. Cooperation is the way to go to tackle the big cross-cutting issues we are so concerned about today: environmental degradation, biodiversity, climate, and so on. It is so clear, for example, that we need cooperation to make sure that climate action actually happens, that we go for mitigation and adaptation together, that every policy sphere does its part, and that there is coherence in the way we act. Some of these Nexus solutions may exist already. Maybe they're not called Nexus, and in that case, we need to find them, connect them, learn how to replicate them, upgrade them, upscale them, and so on. It was really great to plan this discussion with the GIZ and IDP colleagues, drawing from their experience supporting regional cooperation in various areas of the world through the Nexus Regional Dialogue Program in particular, and of the GIZ and IDB's Transboundary Waters Program. This knowledge base that emerges from this experience should be shared and integrated with other different perspectives. So I hope that this discussion today will help us in doing this, and that also that we will continue this discussion through the platform of the Nexus Task Force under the Water Convention. There will be a short summary of this session, which will be posted on the Nexus Resource platform, and you can use it as a guide to contact our speakers and as a source to find out more about their work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucia, for this very comprehensive overview and setting the context, the bigger context of which when we're doing the session. You mentioned different challenges and opportunities that the WEFE Nexus poses with regards to channeling and mobilizing finances. Without further ado, I would like to, one of them was the need to have more evidence-based arguments for WEFE Nexus in the mobilization of resources and financing. And one of these evidences we would like to now hear from, present through the presentation by Cristina Mercedes from IDB. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning to everybody. Good afternoon to some of you. Thank you, Irene, for the presentation. I don't know if you can see the, okay, you can see the presentation. Then, yes, I'm presenting now the case study for multipurpose water resources, a project for La Paz and El Alto. I think that this project fits very well in the main title for the session, From Risk to Return. Next, please. Next. Okay, thank you. Then I'll give you a very brief background on the project. As you can see in the left side of the image, you can see in the southern part of the map, the El Alto city. Then first important thing to share is that this project was born as a water project specifically for El Alto city. Then you can see in the northern part of the map, close to the high peak of the Eastern Cordillera, the Cotiacota and Taipichaca. These are the planned water sources for the El Alto water project. Then at the very earliest stages of the preparation and when we started the study, we realized that it's not possible to extract water from the basin, taking it into El Alto without addressing the full problematic of the basin. As you can see, we have here 5 micro basins. This is part of the Titicaca Lake system, the sedimentary and endorheic basin watershed. Then what we have here, we have a very interesting system with different altitudinal distribution from the high basin in the mountains to the lake. Then we have different ecosystem services related with this altitudinal distribution. We have a productive vocation in the basin, and we have also very valuable cultural thoughts with indigenous people, with the communities. Also, we have this traditional knowledge from the natural resources management. Then we have a lot of interesting issues in the basin that we have to take into account if we have to prepare a successful operation. That what we identify at the beginning is that we have a lot of irrigation systems that are non-efficient one. Also, we have a lot of communities that they don't have water service yet. And also we start to listen to the people, and we heard stories about climate change impact. I mean, people are already suffering from this. For example, if you can see the graphic at center down, you can see how hydrological cycle has displacement from September, October, November, starting the rains, precipitation displaced, starting in December, January, with the impact that this has in south for the people. Then also we have a very, very interesting regulation system in the basin, led by the high, but the how is called the wetlands in high altitude, that has a regulation function in the system, not only for the quantity, retaining water during rainy season and draining this water during dry season, but also in quality, also reducing or controlling acidity, and also maintaining a rich biodiversity. Then how to include all these elements in only one operation, a project that was originally conceived as water project. Then this preparation was a big effort for Bolivia, I mean, led by the country. Please, next slide. Thank you. Then it started with an integral diagnosis, I mean, very participatory diagnosis, listening to all the indigenous thoughts and ways to manage the lands. Then we could, I mean, disaggregate the 3 scopes: biophysical, socioeconomic, institutional, knowledge, and we had all the sector and subsector for productive issues, and also to protect environmental and ecosystem services. At the end, we end up with 3 components. I mean, with a multi-purpose project that has component 1, dealing with all the water supply system for El Alto, but not only for El Alto, also for communities in Batallas, but also including entrepreneurship for women. For example, a big program for environmental and social management plan that is required for IDB and I think that other international funds. Also this awareness and education campaign, institutional strengthen, management model for the system. This is component 1. Also, we designed the component 2 that is dealing with irrigation systems, improve efficiency, increase warranties, capacities, and also dealing with management model. Also here, it's included an impact evaluation. Third component is very, very interesting one, and it's important in Bolivia to highlight this component because it's all the integrated watershed management and land use projects. I mean, in Bolivia, there is also there is yet a regulation to elaborate and to implement all these kind of projects that has into account all the related issues related to integrated water resource management. Then this component allows us to include all the activities that are not included in component 1 and component 2. I mean, this basin has high level of conflictivity because of different water uses. Then we cannot think that it's only water supply or irrigation. I mean, this may be the main conflict, but we have a lot of cross-sectoral issues. You have livestock, you have risk, river erosion, soil degradation. Then this component 3 is very participatory component and is addressing all the rest of the things in the basin. Then with also the environmental plans, highlands, wetlands management is included in this component 3. Then next, please. Next. Okay, thank you. Then this is the main design for the component 1 and 2. Also, we have the expected results related to water availability, regulation, warranty, increasing resilience capacities, and at the end, a human development index. Then next question is how to finance this operation. I mean, we deal with the preparation, with all negotiation process. We mainstream Nexus from the beginning. We heard the people, indigenous thought. We included green infrastructure. We deepen the knowledge on eco-hydrological ecosystem functions for the wetland, but now we have to finance and we have to implement. Then next, please. Okay, then we have the finance preparation, implementation, and sustainability. In this presentation, I will focus in implementation. The project is in implementation stage. Then we have to finance drinking water services, irrigation, productive activities, environmental services, and of course, water resources governance and monitoring and evaluation. Then next, please. First of all, we have to start with national strategies. This program was related to pilot program for climate resilience in Bolivia. Then we started with to financing, managing the climate investment funds. Then the component 2 related to irrigation is completely financed by climate investment funds from PPCR program for Bolivia. Then this is very interesting part because component 1 that is related with water supply is financed by, next please, by IDB, then multilateral. Then we finance all the part related with water supply. That was the original idea for the program. Then we go to climate financing for component 2 that is related with all this efficient in irrigation and improving income for communities. And also we add for the component 3 this international and bilateral financing. I would like to highlight here the Nordic Development Fund that is financing the component 3 for the project. Then we have a very consolidated financing, but this is not the only financing or funding for this operation. Then please next and next. I will go together because I think I have no much time. Then also important thing is that this operation had $24 million for a local counterpart. Local counterpart coming from where? Coming from service operator, from the water and sanitation operator for La Paz and El Alto, and also from subnational level, from annual local budgets for municipalities and departments, $24 million. That is increasing the total amount of the operation. And only to end the financing part, next, please. and also taking into account all the sustainability, I would like also to mention that all the component 3 and component 2 that are promoting these productive activities and market services are already promoting ecotourism in the basin, circular economy, business models with exchange between lower part and high part in the basin. Then this is also a return from the operation that we have to take into account when we plan the overall structure for financing. And also is like recent environmental regulation and innovation that we are making like transfers from self-supply regulated systems from, for example, factories or industrial uses in the basin. They are paying to the operator, and the operator is transferring these funds for water sources protection plans. Then this is like a funds entry also for sustainability that is starting, but is very promising, we think, for this project. Also, I would like to highlight this ancestral management, monitoring services, what subnational level are the main actors, I think. And the last slide, please. Okay, then only, I think, 6 things to finish. This climate strategy at country level, this is very important. We need the studies. We need to establish the financing requirement for the project. We need to, to disaggregate what are the financing for developing water services, water coverage, and what are financing for resilience, for adaptation. Then we can find different sources. Also, we have to perform this comprehensive diagnosis. It's very important, and we have funds for preparation that we can ask also external, but also we can prepare, in Bolivia, they have the national river basin plan that is consolidating funds from a basket from donors. Then, we can perform this comprehensive cross-sectoral multi-stakeholder diagnosis. And also there's 4 important things. Institutional coordination and incentives is very important. I think, of course, that we have some transactional cost in time and effort and studies for this comprehensive approach. But what I have to say is, without this approach, we cannot make viable the project. It is not possible to implement this kind of project without this approach. Then it is worthy for us to start, and also we can replicate because it's in the framework of national strategy for Bolivia. Then we are learning from that, and we can replicate in another basin with similar problematic. Also, the 3 last things I would like to highlight: a strategic partnership for institutional strengthening. It's not therefore for this operation what we create with this, the committees, the institutional, the water governance will remain after the project. Then this is strategic to finance this kind of operation. Also, don't forget the local budget, subnational level, culture ownership, and to finish, track indicators and flows to close the circle, to go again to national climate strategy and go back to a strategic partnership. Then thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina. This has been a very comprehensive presentation on the setup of a complex project and how important is the intersectoral collaboration, but also aligning international and national agendas and ensuring the participation of the local communities, the local government, the regional government, and the national government, ensuring a good integration for ensuring ownership and sustainability. So this has a very comprehensive presentation. Allow me then to go to the panel so we can start discussing this very rich presentation. So allow me to introduce you to our panelists today. We are having a panel of 4 experts with Mónica Altamirano, who is a public-private partnership specialist at Deltares. She holds a PhD in economics of infrastructure and has a vast experience advising governments globally on catalyzing private sector investments in water infrastructure and climate adaptation. Also with us today is Deepak Gawali. He's a hydroelectric power engineer and political economist who, during his time as Nepal's Prime Minister of Water Resources, initiated reforms in the electricity and irrigation sectors, focused on decentralization and promotion of rural participation in governance. He currently works at the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology. With us today also is Albert Bockestein. He has an extensive experience working in the development sector, sustainable forest management, climate change in South America and Africa, and he is working as SNAV Netherlands, supporting the Dutch fund, integrating in the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And finally, Luca Traini, he's a program manager and access to energy at Rest for Africa Foundation. He has extensive experience in business development for renewables and has worked also in Tanzania. So allow me to start with a question for Monica on, in relation to the presentation we just saw from Christina. So Monica, based on the Bolivia case study, what do you think has been the key success factors that are necessary for mainstreaming the WEFE Nexus financing based on what we have seen now? Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with all of you today discussing the Nexus investments. Yes, I mean, something before I start to say is that for us to do investments that are worth, right, we need to look at 5 business cases, the strategic, the economic, but also the commercial, financial, and management business cases. So I'll come a little bit back to it in looking at the case of Bolivia, because I think most of the time we stop, especially as water community, maybe on the economic business case, but we don't go further, right? And those are vital for the financial sustainability. So I think, I mean, the way the project was structured looks like it really was strong on getting a very good strategic case, connecting that to larger policy priorities. And also, I think on a more global level, looks like a very good example of getting to that coherence and complementarity between funds that we need, for this to happen. Then I think it's also very important that this is really explicit in unlocking the complementarity between gray and natural infrastructure, and increasing that awareness at all levels that were part of the project, that the role of ecosystems, as really active providers of basic services. I think it's really important because when we do that, when we don't see them one versus the other, but really in that systemic way, bringing together the services, we can unlock new sources of funding and put in motion a transformation in the role of institutions like utilities and others that would start to include that infrastructure upstream, that natural infrastructure upstream in how they look at their optimized investment plans, right? Then the participatory approach to IWRM planning to navigate those trade-offs is very important. Not just, maybe we don't see it now, but it will be very important to grant a social license to those investments. We see more and more in Latin America, maybe because we're especially the youth is really about saying what they don't agree in certain things, that many of these investments that are just for one sector and that are purely gray infrastructure are starting to be opposed. So that I think is quite important also for we would say the management case of the project too. The creation of capacity to plan for a changing climate, I think that's very important, and the institutional strengthening that took place in the project. And also the learning to access climate finance and give climate finance that role that it should have, that is to pay for those extra transaction costs and for those, covering those risks for those innovations that you're implementing when you're adapting. The compensation to the most vulnerable, which also makes the case, right? A strong economic and a strategic case. And showing that climate finance can be that neutral space, maybe, or planning for climate adaptation could be that neutral space when we find some nexus options, Now, I do think that we could go a little further, and we will discuss more. But in how do we make that very special investment be part of the creation of new value chains and markets, no? And how do we, through that effort and others that come after, we can really give shape to a new asset class, like a multifunctional adaptive infrastructure that would include natural infrastructure that can pass the test of future needs. Because I think not just in terms of climate change, socially, you see the infrastructures type of assets we had and we were building the last 10 years are not passing the test anymore. So, and in that respect, just to almost go to the final point, deliberately working with the institutions to design procurement strategies that are better at taking up innovations, and that can create a pool, not just of clients, but also of trustworthy suppliers that could be a constant source of green jobs, and also creating a very visible, maybe skill, like a pool of multi-sectoral planners and investment planners that can be accessible for possible next projects, either by the IDB or other groups. So I think that would be it. And in that respect, also the process of participation is quite important, but it's still a challenge to involve the private sector earlier and in a transparent way, because I really think they could come maybe to new out of the box ideas if we do that process very transparent, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And also for bringing in this the look from the private sector. And now, so we would go to the public sector. Deepak, for you, I would like to ask you, so from a public sector perspective, where do you see challenges to mobilize financing for projects targeting water, energy, and food security?
Thank you. By public sector, I'm assuming that you assume I am a minister again, a minister of finance, energy, water, agriculture, whatever, or even worse, a prime minister. The problem a public sector decision maker would have at this point in the global south, which is what I'm going to be talking about, is that many of our countries have non-tradable currencies. That's the first thing. I mean, I can't just go to a bank and exchange my Nepali rupees for US dollars or British pounds or whatever. It's highly restricted. It's limited to, I think, travelers to just near $1,500 right now. So when we talk financing, you've got to talk about this restricted currency which dominates the economy. The second thing that we have there as a reality is the informal economy. In the global south, estimates vary because this is the informal economy. Countries like Nepal's, the economy would be anywhere 60 to 80, 90% in the informal sector. The formal sector economy is quite a small icing on top of the cake. Okay. Now, taking these two realities into consideration, when we are talking water, energy, food, nexus projects that span these silos, we are talking about, we have to distinguish about what kind of goods are we talking about. Private goods, market, business, finance, economics, textbook economics, they're quite good at dealing with it. Unfortunately, private goods are only a small part of it, okay? It's public goods, public goods that have users that are not even directly connected to the project or the ministry or whatever, okay? You build a road and the road is not just going to be used by, people who have cars. It's going to be used by a lot of people, others who have bullock carts or you name it, a bicycle and a trader on a bicycle and so on, okay? And therefore recovering that finance from these informal sectors becomes an impossible task, but trying to do so also involves massive unpopular politics, okay, which most politicians will shy away from. That's the other thing. But even more difficult in many of these nexus projects, we are creating not just private goods, not just public goods, we're also creating common pool goods that transcend the present generation. So the users are going to be from the future generation who are obviously not going to be involved in the current financing of these projects. Okay, but they are very necessary. You know, a clean river that we bequeath or a clean lake we bequeath to our children and grandchildren is a moral imperative. So when we talk financing, you suddenly find out in the global south that the methods, the mechanisms of financing as occurs at high finance level, as I call it, you know, the World Banks, the IMFs, and you know, all these big places, they do not have much resonance with the concerns of the ground. Now, this brings me to this whole issue of who bears the risks. Now, high finance in development over the last 50, 60 years has really not taken the risk, the global high finance, okay? What they have done is they have fobbed off the risk to sovereign loans of national governments, who have then fobbed it off to unsuspecting consumers and you know, voters and others of the global south. Okay? Through all kinds of means, through inflation, deliberate inflation, printing of money, I mean, you name it, you know, there are lots of tricks. And we have seen that in 2008 with the financial crisis, there are lots of tricks, you know, that all kinds of people employ. And when the whole system comes crashing down, there's a lot of blame game going around. So what really is a problem here is that the small finance drivers are what drives a great part of the economy, that moves a lot of the voters, that as a public sector decision maker, I would have to be really concerned about, but on which, you know, my, you know, finance ministry or whatever really has no grips on, but which as politicians, no one can ignore. Okay. Now, this leads to all kinds of projects that are denexused. For example, a reservoir in Nepal, the biggest reservoir we have, hydroelectric, was designed as a hydroelectric project. But suddenly we today find out that there's a very vibrant informal economy fishing industry going around that reservoir by mostly farmers who actually lost their land to the reservoir, okay? And they're raising fish in cages, they're selling fish in the market. It's all in the informal economy. And who financed it? Not the government, not high finance, but small scale traders and so on and so forth at the very, very local level. So this really brings me into to introduce the question which we may get into later. Recently in July, the G20 finance ministers met to talk about the current financial crisis, the global crisis, the problems that we have. And there was talk about debt service suspension, special drawing rights, and the global tax on carbon. Now, all of these are going to be tied up in the nexus financing with this high finance. Okay, how it translates into individual countries' concerns, you know, with risk, where you have risk-taking market, risk managing government, and risk sensitizing civil society, will be critical, because we are talking not just public-private partnership, we are talking public-private civic partnership. And the civic guys can be a nasty lot to most politicians in the global south. Believe me, we cannot ignore them. We may not like them, but you know, they are a reality and they move masses. So I just close with that, and we probably can get into more discussion on the financing issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. I'm actually not sure how much of a discussion we can have after the first round of the panel discussion. It was a pleasure to listen to you, as it always is. I think we should next year consider doing a session just with you. And now I have the difficult task of transitioning to the next speaker without having to give him the burden of having to reply to all the different interesting topics that you've raised, ranging from the need to consider the potential of the informal economy. And then I try to summarize the need of the high finance to consider the reality of and the potential of small financing, and also to consider the realities of the needs of the beneficiary populations. I believe Albert Bockenstein from SNV, representing also the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, I believe you do have, let's say, a response to the challenges raised by Deepak through the origination facility that SNV is hosting together with WWF and the landscape approach. And I would like to invite you to tell us more about these facilities. So
Thank you very much, Irene. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel, and interesting topics being arranged. And actually, you already mentioned the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. That's a 160 million euro fund provided by the Dutch government, with the motivation and with the aim really to see how public funding can leverage private investments. Yeah. And that's really needed if you look a little bit like the current situation, and if you look what is needed and what is now being invested with public means, that's really far off what is needed. If we roughly estimate, maybe we're talking only that 20% of the needs are covered now by maybe public funding. So there's a real gap in how do we bridge the other 80%. And part of that solution we think we can do by leveraging private investments and private investments at scale. And that's exactly what the DFCD ambition is really to invest in those proposals, yeah, in those plans that that really impact at scale on foremost climate change adaptation. Therefore, we have within the DFCD 3 facilities, 2 investment facilities, one on water, managed by climate fund managers and focusing foremost in investments in infrastructure, be it grey or green. A land use facility managed by the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank, FMO, looking more at agriculture and forestry. And like you already mentioned, an origination facility managed by the World Wildlife Fund for Nature, Netherlands, and SNV, Netherlands Development Organization. And the idea behind this is that for the investors, it's very hard to find good investable projects, because what they see as investable projects is already ticking the boxes of it has to be on the right size, a minimum size of investments, and a lot of investors are always looking 5 million and beyond as a minimum, and then also want having value for their money, and they don't want to run a lot of risks, and then also they running to de-risk. They also like to work with capable and trustworthy sponsors and companies that already have established a good track record. And foremost, they also want to have proposals that really are embedded and supported by the public and civil society. And that's a lot to ask for if you're going to look at development countries and really at least development countries, because you won't find it. Yeah, you will find ideas, but these ideas need to grow and to prosper, and we don't have time. And therefore, within the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, we have this origination facility that really can invest in bringing ideas into bankable projects that are sufficiently de-risked, so that investors like FMO, like climate fund managers, really having appetite. This is one issue that we are already working on in the last 2 years. We currently now working already on 16 proposals, and we hope to go to 30 up to 2023. Currently working in Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, India, Kenya, Zambia, Uganda, South Sudan, Mali, and Nicaragua in Central America. But already from that experience, it really needs time and dedication, and also not only getting a company on board, but also getting although I think that Deepak doesn't like the word stakeholders, but getting all the actors around, yeah, for this buy-in, and really that the investments are not only making profit for the company, but really have not as a side benefit, but really as an aim really to impact on livelihoods and on climate change adaptation. And therefore we have resources available, both as WWF and SNV, to really to invest in those processes, in really in testing out, yeah, and within 1.5 years, with intensive cooperation at a landscape level, yeah, to come up with sound proposals, yeah, and also this landscape level is very important as well, because it's okay. I know it's a buzzword right now. Everybody goes for a landscape, but indeed, if you talk about the impact of climate change, you have to look at a landscape, because there are no to address it, and you also have to address it from a multi-focus point of view, and you can't really with one answer or one project solve all issues. So really you also have to focus on the interrelationship of different initiatives, in which also the private sector becomes a part, yeah, of. So that's also what I liked very much about the Bolivia case, is in looking at, okay, here there's a process in bringing together. It costs resources, we know, but it's worthwhile, because if you don't do it, it only backfires on you, and not even for the private sector will be interesting in investing in it, yeah, and especially on resources like water. From my own experience in my work in Bolivia, I know how this can become very political. So that's also an issue on how do you marry political interest with also investment for the private sector. That's not easy. But as a DFCD, we have now the resources, at least to, and we're already developing these processes with stakeholders, with companies. And with investors, really to convince them that's worthwhile to invest in it. And I must say, it's not the most difficult part is to get investors convinced, because it's always too risky. And like you said, if you invest in local currency, how do you get the local currency converted to dollars so you can get it out of the country again and reinvest it? All those kind of things come up, and we have to find answers to. Yeah, and that's what we're working on. And I still think as DFCD, we're contributing in making these proposals work, and hopefully within a year and a half, I really can share with you some really good successful examples. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert. I have to quickly move on. You mentioned the need to convince investors not only to engage, to take on the extra transition and effort costs to engage with different stakeholders, but I would now like to also present the next speaker, who will also put forward arguments on how to convince investors to invest in multi-purpose and integrated projects. Luca Daidi from WEFE Africa, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So, yes, we look at WEFE Africa. We, of course, came across to start studying some years ago now the Nexus approach, looking from the eye of the energy, of the renewable energy sector, which is our comfort zone, I would say, and shortly going through all the synergies, project and financing wise, of the Nexus. And particularly looking at how beneficial, and then also in terms of benefits, running cost benefits analysis, financial analysis of several projects, renewable energy project, integrated project, water energy food nexus project, and comparing single source project versus integrated project, and demonstrating on paper and with a real project how those integrated projects can not only bring greater development results, development impact results, which is fairly easy to guess, because if you put together investment in different sectors, you would expect a higher multiplier effect. But the interesting thing is, in most of the cases, those integrated projects were also able, if well run, were also able to provide better financial return, which is a much different thing to prove. And I believe it's a game changer for the discussion we are having here. Then I would also like to to comment and complement what have been said before, it's about the role of the public and private sector, where I believe, as the other colleague said, about the huge role for the private sector to step in with financial resources, where particularly the public sector cannot afford to put those amount of money. In this case, I believe that, as is evident here, money is available, money is everywhere. We have banks, development banks, just desperately looking for projects. Lenders are everywhere. It's a matter of risk. You want to take a risk, and how we de-risk those projects, particularly projects that are integrated. The world, the world is integrated, while the governments and the finance and the project usually are silo projects, which means it's very difficult, and it's bring further risk to the table. So we need much, I would say, higher appetite for those projects. We need to allocate risk, which are newer to the business as usual. We were used to water project, to energy project, to agricultural project. Now we're trying to move to a more integrated project. But the last thing I want to mention is the fact that while there is a huge amount of money out there, I believe there are very few actors who are working to create the enabling environment, because you're not attracting private sector saying that there is a huge amount of money available. You attract private sector trying to create the enabling environment, which means working with the government, working with local content, working with the creating local condition to invest, creating local capacity, people able to work on those kind of projects. If the condition will be there, project will be there, and money will be always available. So I believe there should be a call, not just for money, but also to work more and more with governments that create the enabling environment to attract this investment and the private sector to develop sustainable projects, because that is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca, and thank you for all our panelists. Sadly, we have barely time for taking up questions from the audience. But as Lucia said at the beginning, you can follow us on the Nexus resource platform, where you can also contact us for further questions. I would like, as we don't have much time left, without further ado, to hand it over to Raúl Muñoz, representing the Inter-American Development Bank, where he's leading several initiatives on the WEFE Nexus to wrap it up. And also at the same time highlighting the importance of what Monica said, how climate adaptation can be that neutral place to bring in WEFE Nexus investments. So Raúl, please, I'm sorry you have, I think, like 3 to 4 minutes.
No, thank you so much. I won't be long. I just want to say thank you to the speakers. I think we had a very rich discussion. So thank you, Deepak, Monica, Christina, Albert, Luca, Lucia, and Irene, and you for the coordination for this meeting. So we have representatives from different backgrounds. Basically, I took some notes that I usually hear in many of these Nexus meetings that we have been supporting and hosting in the last few years. So like trade-offs, impacts, silos, benefits, transboundary management, de-risking finance, investments, transaction costs, climate finance, and common goods, for instance. So what we usually say at and this is as a closing remark message, we say at the IDB, we're working in the Nexus, that we have been supporting Latin America for quite a long time now, like 6 years, is that the Nexus is finally common sense, which is most likely the less use of the sense that we can see lately. So basically the question is easy. So less available common resources driving a climate change combined with socioeconomic global dynamics. So the perfect equation for disaster, for not getting implemented the NDCs and the SDGs and the international commitments, and not ensure sustainable development if we are not smart enough to reconcile the multiple demands for water. So I won't be long than that. I want to say thank you again for the presentation and discussion. I'm happy to join in future opportunities. Thank you all.